Charles Chuck Morgan was a 39-year-old businessman residing in Tucson, Arizona. He was married to Ruth and had two daughters, and owned his own escrow agency. In the 1970s, Arizona became known as a haven for money laundering, thanks to the law allowing anyone to buy land through blind trust accounts. The mafia could launder large amount of money without leaving any traces. In no time, over 500 racketeers were conducting business in Arizona. As a result, the state experienced an increase in gang-style murders. Morgan had mentioned to his wife that money laundering had been going around. However, he claimed to not be a part of it. Furthermore, he said that least Ruth and their daughters knew the better. On March 22, 1977, Morgan left his family with his two daughters and drove them to school. Later that night, after he had failed to show up at work and hadn't come home, his wife reported him missing. 3 days later, Ruth was awoken by a thump on the back door at 2 a.m. When she opened the door, she was shocked to see her missing husband. Morgan's hands were tied with a plastic zip tie and he had a plastic handcuff around his ankle. He couldn't speak, so Ruth grabbed a notepad and a pen. Morgan wrote that he had been abducted and tortured. Moreover, he had a hallucinogenic drug painted on his throat which prevented him from speaking. If the paint was ingested, his nervous system would stop working and ultimately cause his death. Then he asked his wife to move his car, as he didn't want them to know he was back. When Ruth repeatedly said she wanted to call the police or at least a doctor, Morgan vehemently refused, stating that they would put a hit on the whole family. Ruth nursed her husband back to health during the next week, feeding him with an eyedropper. During this time, Morgan adverted to having secret identity. Apparently, for the last 2 or 3 years, he had been a secret agent for the federal government and fought against organized crime. He claimed that they had taken away his treasury identification. Once recovered, Morgan was a naturally paranoid person. He wore a bulletproof vest at all times and no one was allowed to drive his daughters to and from school except for him. He even spoke to school officials, stating that the girls were not allowed to leave with anyone else but their father. Oddly, Morgan also told his father that he had written and hidden a letter which stated who would be responsible if something were to happen to him. 2 months after Morgan's first disappearance, he went missing again. 9 days later, and no signs of her husband, Ruth received an odd call from a woman who did not identify herself. The mysterious woman simply said, Ruthie, Chuck is all right. Ecclesiastes 12 1 through 8. The passage reads, Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. When the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim, when the doors are shut in the streets, and the sound of the grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of music are brought low. Also, they are afraid of height, and of terrors in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper is a burden, and the desire fails. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to the God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. 2 days after the call, Morgan was found dead in the desert. The crime scene had various noteworthy characteristics. Morgan was still wearing his bulletproof vest. The cause of death was a single bullet to the back of his head, fired at close range. Morgan's own .357 Magnum had been used and was lying beside his body. In his car were various weapons and supplies of ammunition. Oddly, his car had been altered to unlock from the fender. There was no fingerprint at the crime scene, including none on the gun. Morgan's head had gunpowder. Interestingly, Morgan was right-handed and the powder was in his left hand. Morgan's belt buckle concealed a knife. In the rear seat of the car, one of Morgan's teeth was wrapped in a white handkerchief. A piece of paper with the directions to the spot where he died was found in his handwriting. Near him were a pair of sunglasses which did not belong to Morgan. A $2 bill was clipped inside his underwear. On it were written various words and some drawings referencing Freemasonry. 7 Spanish names beginning with the letter A to G were written on the bill: Acevedo, Bejarano, Cairo, Duarte, Encinas, Fuente, Gardilas. Above the name was Ecclesiastes 12. An arrow pointed at the numbers 1 and 8 within Bill's serial number. On the back, the signers of the Declaration of Independence were numbered 1 through 7, and there was a roughly drawn map. This map represented the towns of Robust Junction and Sala City, an area between Tucson and Mexico known for drug smuggling. Authorities were convinced Morgan had committed suicide. However, many people, including his wife and investigative journalist Don Devereaux, are certain that he was murdered. 2 days after Morgan's body was found, a woman going by the name of Green Eyes called the police department and provided some interesting information on the recently deceased man. She claimed to have met with Morgan in a motel shortly before his death and that he showed her a briefcase containing thousands of dollars in cash. Morgan told her the money was to buy himself out of a contract the mob has put on his life. The anonymous woman also claimed to be the one who called Ruth and gave her Bible reference. Authorities were able to confirm that Morgan had, in fact, stayed in a West Side motel for over a week before his death. To add to the mystery of her husband's death, Ruth was visited by 2 FBI agents 3 weeks after Morgan's death. The agents, who hurriedly showed their badges, stormed into Ruth's home and ransacked everything while searching for something. They did not say what they wanted and appeared to have not found it. The men eventually left and Ruth, naturally shaken and alarmed by the incident, still does not know if the men actually belong to the FBI. Don Devereaux contacted the FBI and requested they release information in the Morgan case under the Freedom of Information Act. He was denied as the FBI claimed to not know who Charles Morgan was. If Charles Morgan did in fact work for the government and had been closely watching organized crime families, it is speculated that the odd $2 bill was actually a bunch of coded messages for the FBI. Don ended up finding out that Morgan had been heavily involved in money laundering in the early 1970s. By 1973, Morgan was using his escrow business to launder large sales of gold and platinum, over $1 billion, mostly from Southeast Asia. Morgan kept duplicate records of these illegal transactions, hoping they would help him in the future. According to a rumor, undercover CIA agents, people from the Defense Department, and exiled Vietnamese government officials were also involved. It is speculated that Morgan was killed for these records. Moreover, Morgan worked with at least one organized crime family who may have killed him if he found out too much. Some people believe the mob put a hit on Morgan. Somehow, word got out and the hitman informed Morgan that he was going to be killed. Morgan then decided he would buy himself out of the hit by giving the assassin the money in the briefcase he had at the motel. But when he met with the hitman in the desert, he took the money and killed Morgan anyway. At the time of his death, Morgan was an involuntary witness for the Arizona General Attorney's Office inquest involving a bank. Also, he was a key witness in a secret state investigation on illegal activity on the Arizona and Mexico border. Prosecutors were building a case against a known organized crime family. Furthermore, one of Morgan's daughter, Megan, claims her father knew a lot of secrets about important Tucson politicians. On May 14, 1990, 35-year-old Doug Johnson was fatally shot in his car in the parking lot outside of a computer graphics company's office, where he was supposed to work the night shift in Phoenix, Arizona. Authorities believe it was a suicide, but his family and Devereaux disagree. Not only did Johnson have no gunpowder on either of his hands, but there was no gun at the scene. Devereaux is certain he was killed by a hitman, who had been hired to kill Devereaux, not Johnson. Devereaux had recently worked on the episode of Unsolved Mysteries that featured Charles Morgan's death, which aired in February of that year. He also drove a similar car to Johnson and lived across the street from the parking lot where Johnson had been shot. A year after, a fellow investigative reporter, Danny Casolaro, contacted Devereaux. He wanted to share the information he had recently discovered about the Morgan case, particularly concerning the transactions he made. Devereaux naturally asked Casolaro to send him the material. However, before Casolaro was able to do so, he was found dead. A cleaning lady found Casolaro's body in the bathtub of a motel in Martinsburg, West Virginia. His wrist had been slashed 12 times with a razor blade. A suicide note was found at the scene. To my loved ones, please forgive me, most especially my son, and be understanding. God will let me in. Casolaro's family refused to accept that he would commit suicide, especially with the razor, as he was deathly afraid of needles and blood. Charles Morgan's death still remains a mystery. Sadly, his wife Ruth passed away in 2006, not knowing the cause of her husband's bizarre death and possible secret life. The letter that supposedly contained what was responsible for his death was never found.